In the scorching stillness of rural Texas, an old man in a battered '89 Ford pickup was about to face down a wall of chrome and leather. A simple afternoon drive with his dog turned deadly when the Devil's Chain Gang boxed him in at the narrow Thorn Creek Bridge. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical retiree. For decades, he'd served as an elite martial artist, actor, and U.S. Air Force veteran, known for dismantling opponents with surgical precision and unshakable calm. When the Devil's Chain Gang surrounded his truck, they had no idea they were picking a fight with a man who'd spent his life ending them. Chuck responded with measured efficiency, dismantling their formation in seconds, triggering fractures inside the gang that would echo far beyond that bridge. What began as a roadside shakedown would become a turning point in a criminal empire's downfall. The back roads of West Texas would never be the same after Chuck Norris left his mark on them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun blazed mercilessly over the Texas highway, turning the two-lane stretch of asphalt into a shimmering mirage that wavered in the distance. Heat rose in visible waves, distorting the horizon where dusty brown earth met relentless blue sky. It was the kind of scorching afternoon when most locals knew better than to venture out, when the very air felt thick enough to chew and even the vultures sought shelter. Chuck Norris adjusted his worn cowboy hat, pushing it back slightly from his weathered brow. His calloused fingers tapped a quiet rhythm against the cracked steering wheel of his '89 Ford pickup. The truck, once blue, now a patchwork of rust and sun-bleached paint, rolled steadily along Highway 62, 20 miles outside the town of Fort Hancock. Beside him, sprawled across the passenger seat, with his head hanging half out the open window, Dusty panted contentedly. The German Shepherd mix, graying around the muzzle, seemed impervious to the heat, his tongue lolling lazily as the warm air rushed past. Chuck glanced at his companion, the corner of his mouth lifting in the ghost of a smile. "Not much farther," he said, voice low and graveled with age, the words barely audible above the rumble of the engine and the whine of the struggling air conditioner. Years of solitude had made conversation a luxury rather than a necessity. Phrases came out clipped, efficient, like everything else about the man. At 65, Chuck Norris carried his years with the same quiet dignity he'd carried everything else in his life. War medals, championship belts, the weight of too many goodbyes. His frame remained solid, if slightly leaner than in his prime, a testament to a lifetime of discipline that hadn't faded with the decades. The narrow bridge spanning Thorn Creek appeared ahead, a bottleneck on the otherwise empty highway. Chuck eased his foot off the accelerator, the old truck slowing as they approached. Through his rearview mirror, he caught the first glint of something metallic on the road behind him, chrome flashing in the sunlight, then disappearing behind a rise. Dusty's ears perked slightly, his head lifting as he sensed the change in Chuck's posture. The dog's eyes, sharp despite his years, followed his master's gaze to the mirror. Chuck had heard them before he saw them, the distant rumble growing steadily louder, like thunder approaching across the plains. But this wasn't nature's warning. This was man-made, synchronized growl of motorcycle engines being pushed hard, eating up the distance between them and his truck with deliberate speed. The first bike crested the rise behind him. Then another, and another, a staggered formation of gleaming machines and leather-clad riders appearing in his mirrors like a swarm materializing from the heat waves. 8 riders in total, moving with practiced precision, their engines harmonizing into a predatory growl as they closed the gap. Chuck's expression remained unchanged, eyes steady on the road ahead. Only the slightest tightening of his fingers on the wheel betrayed any recognition of what was coming. The Devil's Chain Gang. He'd heard about them in town, everyone had. They'd established themselves across 3 counties over the past 2 years, claiming the highways as their territory. Started with simple intimidation, blocking roads, surrounding cars, scaring tourists and locals alike, before escalating to extortion from truckers and businesses along their routes. Local law enforcement seemed perpetually one step behind, either undermanned or unwilling to confront the growing problem head-on. The lead rider cut his bike sharply, pulling alongside Chuck's driver's side window. Even without looking directly, Chuck took in the details: the sleek black Harley with custom chromework, the rider's heavily tattooed forearms, the leather cut emblazoned with the gang's insignia, a broken chain twisted into the shape of horns. Rider Chain. Maddox, the gang's leader, though Chuck didn't know him by name yet. What he did recognize was the predatory confidence in how the man handled his machine, the casual ownership with which he commanded not just his bike, but the space around it. It was a dominance display Chuck had seen countless times before, across jungles and deserts, fighting rings and battlefields, the peacocking of someone who believed fear and respect were the same thing. Chuck kept his eyes on the bridge ahead, maintaining his speed. Two more riders appeared in his peripheral vision, flanking his truck on the right side. One slapped the passenger door hard enough to make the metal ring, startling Dusty, who pulled his head in from the window but remained otherwise composed, watching the bikers with alert, unworried eyes. "Switch, circle back," came a command from the lead rider, voice raised above the engine noise. "Box him in." The biker who'd slapped Chuck's truck leaned, with a gaunt face partly hidden behind mirrored sunglasses, revved his engine and peeled away, cutting behind the pickup to approach again from the rear. As they neared the bridge, another rider pulled ahead, then abruptly slowed, forcing Chuck to brake. The truck's worn suspension groaned in protest as it lurched to a near stop. Within seconds, the remaining bikes had surrounded him completely, 2 in front, 3 behind. One on either side, a practiced maneuver that left the truck trapped in a rolling cage of chrome and leather. The lead rider gestured sharply, and as one, the entire formation slowed to a complete stop just before the bridge, engines still rumbling, effectively blocking the entire road. In his rearview mirror, Chuck watched the biker called Switch dismount, strutting toward the truck with exaggerated swagger. Another rider removed their helmet, revealing a woman with sharp features and dark hair pulled back in a tight braid mara. Though again, her name meant nothing to Chuck yet. Unlike the others, she remained on her bike, watching the truck with narrowed eyes. Chuck turned off his engine. The sudden absence of its rumble made the motorcycle's growl seem louder, more aggressive. He sat motionless, hands resting lightly on the wheel, eyes hidden behind reflective aviator sunglasses that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Dusty shifted in the passenger seat, moving closer to his master, but showed none of the agitation or fear a normal dog might display. Like Chuck, he simply waited, calm and alert. Switch approached the driver's side window, tapping the glass with a ringed knuckle. "Hey, old-timer," he called, voice mockingly cheerful. "Toll bridge ahead." Chuck remained still, his weathered face impassive beneath the shadow of his hat. From her position several yards back, Mara frowned slightly. Something about the old man's stillness struck her as odd, not the nervous tension of someone afraid, but something else, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "Rider," she called, voice low but carrying over the idle engines. "Something's off about this one." But Rider Chain. Maddox was already dismounting, removing his gloves one finger at a time, feeding off the moment as his crew watched. He lived for this, the rush of power. The moment when another driver realized just how completely trapped they were. He'd built his reputation on these encounters, carefully cultivated the stories that spread through truck stops and small towns across 3 counties. "Let's see what we've caught today," he said, tucking his gloves into his belt as he approached the truck. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the tableau-rusted pickup surrounded by gleaming motorcycles, dust hanging in the air like a gauzy curtain, heat rippling across the asphalt. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily, riding thermals high above the brewing confrontation. Chuck Norris watched its flight through the windshield, his breathing calm and unhurried. Beside him, Dusty's tail thumped once against the Sieta, quiet punctuation to the silence inside the cab. Outside, Ryder stopped beside Switch, the two men standing shoulder to shoulder as they peered into the truck's shadowed interior. Ryder leaned forward, his handsome face twisted into a grin that never reached his eyes. "Looks like we've got ourselves a real cowboy," he announced, loud enough for his crew to hear. "Welcome to our highway, partner." Chuck turned his head slowly, meeting Ryder's gaze through his sunglasses. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. The confrontation had begun. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the rumble of idling motorcycles and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Ryder's grin remained fixed, but something flickered behind his eyes, the first seed of irritation taking root. People reacted when he approached their vehicles with fear, anger, sometimes tearful pleas. Silence wasn't in the script. He knocked on the window with his knuckles. Harder this time. The sound echoed inside the truck's cab like distant gunfire. "Hey, old man, you gone deaf in there?" Ryder's voice carried the dangerous edge of someone unused to being ignored. "I'm talking to you." Chuck studied him through the glass, taking in the calculated dishevelment of the man's appearance. The designer stubble, the artfully tousled dark hair, the expensive leather cut over a t-shirt that probably cost more than most people's entire outfits. Everything about Ryder Chain Maddox was calibrated for effect, the image of outlaw danger wrapped around a core of privileged entitlement. Switch circled around the front of the truck, trailing his fingers across the hood. "Nice rig," he called out, voice dripping with sarcasm. "What is this, a museum piece?" He pretended to jot down the license plate, calling over his shoulder to the others. "Should we report Grandpa for driving without his nurse?" A ripple of laughter spread through the gang. All except Mara, who remained on her bike, watching the scene with growing unease. Her eyes shifted between Chuck's impassive face and Ryder's increasingly tight expression. "Ryder," she called again, louder this time. "Something's not right about him. Let's move on." Ryder shot her an irritated glance. "Shut it, Mara. I've got this." He turned back to the window, leaning in closer, his breath fogging the glass. "You've got two options, cowboy. Either you pay the toll, or we give you an escort you won't forget." Behind him, the gang members revved their engines in unison, a practiced intimidation tactic that sent birds scattering from nearby trees. Dusty's ears twitched at the sound, but the dog remained calm, dark eyes moving between his master and the men outside. Chuck reached over, placing a weathered hand briefly on the dog's head, a gesture so subtle it was almost imperceptible. After another measured moment, Chuck's hand moved to the window control. The ancient motor whirred as the glass lowered, just enough to create a narrow gap between them. The hot Texas air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of leather, exhaust, and Ryder's expensive cologne. Chuck's voice, when it finally came, was low and measured, quiet enough that Ryder had to lean in to hear it clearly over the rumbling engines. "You done?" 2 words. No anger, no fear, just a simple question delivered with the steady calm of someone asking about the weather. Then the window hummed back up, sealing the cab once more. Ryder blinked, momentarily thrown by the response. It wasn't the quavering voice he'd expected from an old man, nor the angry bluster of someone trying to mask their fear. It was the voice of someone merely passing through an inconvenience, someone who didn't see Ryder Chain Maddox as anything worth getting excited about. Switch let out a harsh laugh, slapping the hood of the truck again. "Oh man, he's got jokes. The old-timer's got jokes." Ryder's jaw tightened, the muscle there jumping beneath his skin. The seed of irritation bloomed into something darker. Being feared was gratifying, being respected was acceptable, but being dismissed? That was intolerable. "Get him out," he said. voice suddenly cold as he stepped back from the truck. "Get him out of that piece of shit truck." The gang responded immediately, engines revving higher as they tightened the circle around Chuck's pickup. Two riders dismounted, moving to flank Ryder, while another positioned his bike directly in front of the truck's hood, blocking any possible forward movement. Inside the cab, Chuck watched the choreographed display with the detached interest of someone who'd seen such performances before and found them lacking. His eyes, hidden behind his sunglasses, noted each position, each movement cataloging strengths, weaknesses, patterns. It was an automatic assessment, ingrained over decades of combat and conflict. Beside him, Dusty sat up straighter, sensing the shift in energy. The dog made no sound, but his posture changed subtly from relaxed to alert, muscles tensing beneath his graying coat. "Last chance, cowboy," Ryder called, loud enough to be heard through the glass. "Step out now, or we drag you out." Chuck's gaze shifted to his rearview mirror, then the side mirrors, taking in the complete picture. 8 gang members, most still on their bikes. Ryder and 2 others directly outside his door. The narrow bridge ahead offering no escape route. The calculation took less than a second, a lifetime of split-second decisions distilled into instant clarity. He reached over to Dusty, giving the dog's ear a gentle scratch. "Stay," he murmured, the command barely audible. Then he turned off the ignition. The sudden silence as the truck's engine died seemed to amplify the motorcycle's growl. Chuck removed his sunglasses, folding them deliberately and placing them on the dashboard. His eyes, when finally revealed, were startlingly clear pale blue and sharp as winter ice, incongruous in his sun-weathered face. Switch, catching a glimpse of those eyes, felt his mocking smile falter slightly. Chuck reached for his hat, adjusting it lower over his brow, then opened the driver's side door. It creaked in protest, a sound that seemed to stretch across the scorching afternoon. The Texas heat hit him like a physical wall as he stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. He stood straight, unhurried, his movements deliberately measured. Though not tall, perhaps 5'10", there was a density to his presence, a groundedness that made him seem immovable. Ryder, several inches taller, took an instinctive half-step back before catching himself. Well. He recovered quickly, voice loud for his audience's benefit. The cowboy finally decides to join the party. Chuck said nothing, merely regarding Ryder with those unsettling pale eyes. His silence was not passive, it was a void that seemed to draw words from others, compelling them to fill the emptiness he created. Switch circled around, unable to resist the pull. "What's the matter, old man? Cat got your tongue? Or you just realizing you picked the wrong road to drive down today?" From her position several yards back, Mara felt the wrongness of the situation intensify. There was something in the old man's stance, a coiled readiness beneath the stillness that set off warning bells. She'd grown up around dangerous men, learned to read the signs most people missed. This man didn't stand like someone afraid. He stood like someone assessing. "Ryder," she called again, voice sharp with unusual urgency. "Let's just move on. Not worth the trouble." Ryder shot her an angry glance. "Since when do you give the orders, Mara? Get back in formation." She held his gaze for a moment, then shook her head slightly, but remained where she was. Chuck's attention caught on the exchange, noting the dynamic, filing it away. His expression remained impassive, but he registered the woman's perception, so different from the blind arrogance of her companions. Ryder turned back to Chuck, stepping closer, deliberately invading his space. "Here's how this works, old-timer. You empty your pockets, wallet, phone, whatever you've got, and maybe we let you and your mutt continue your little Sunday drive." Chuck's gaze traveled slowly from Ryder's face to the gang insignia emblazoned on his leather cut, then back again. His silence had weight now, a pressure building in the air between them. "You deaf or just stupid?" Ryder snapped. patience evaporating in the heat. I said, empty your pockets. The bridge loomed empty behind them, the highway stretching vacant in both directions. No witnesses except the merciless sun and the circling hawk. The world had narrowed to this patch of blistering asphalt, this moment balanced on a knife's edge. I heard you, Chuck finally replied, voice even. I'm just wondering if you boys know what you're doing. Switch barked out a laugh, high and nervous. Listen to him. You boys know what you're doing? Who do you think you are, old man? Chuck Norris? The irony of the question hung in the air, unrecognized by those who had asked it. Chuck's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a brief spark. There and gone so quickly it might have been a trick of the light. Ryder stepped closer still, until his face was inches from Chuck's. His voice dropped to a menacing growl, meant for Chuck alone. I know exactly what I'm doing. I own this road. And right now, I own you. Chuck met his gaze steadily, unflinching. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that Ryder had to strain to hear it. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Son, I've met men like you my whole life. And they all made the same mistake. Despite himself, Ryder found himself asking, what mistake is that? Chuck's answer was delivered with the same calm certainty as everything else he'd said. They confused loudness with strength. Something cold slithered down Ryder's spine, unfamiliar sensation he refused to acknowledge as fear. He covered it with a bark of laughter, turning to make sure his crew could see his contempt. Philosophy from a has-been cowboy. That's rich. He turned back to Chuck, voice hardening. Last chance. Empty your pockets, or things get ugly. Inside the truck, Dusty watched through the windshield, head tilted slightly, alert but unworried. The dog's calm seemed to mirror his master's shared certainty that transcended the tension crackling through the air. Chuck's hands remained at his sides, neither reaching for his wallet nor raising in defense. His stillness was absolute. Now the kind of stillness that precedes earthquake or avalanche. I think, he said softly, things already are. The words hung in the superheated air for a heartbeat. Then, Ryder's patience snapped. With a grunt of frustration, he reached out and shoved Chuck's shoulder hard, the impact punctuating his next words. Enough talk. It was the first physical contact the line crossed. And like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples were about to spread. The shove should have sent a man Chuck's age stumbling backward, off balance and vulnerable. But Chuck Norris didn't move even an inch. His boots remained planted on the sun-baked asphalt as if rooted there, his body absorbing the impact without effort. It was like shoving a brick wall. Ryder blinked, momentary confusion breaking through his anger. He'd expected weakness, frailty, typical vulnerabilities of age. Instead, his hand had met solid muscle beneath the simple cotton shirt, an immovable object where there should have been yielding flesh. Chuck looked down at Ryder's hand, still pressed against his shoulder, then back up to the younger man's face. He didn't speak, but his eyes delivered a clear message. Remove it. A heartbeat of silence stretched between them. Then, with an exaggerated scoff meant to cover his growing unease, Ryder withdrew his hand and took a small step back. Tougher than you look, he said, forcing a smirk. But that won't help you much. Inside the truck, Dusty shifted position, moving to the driver's seat, his dark eyes fixed on the scene outside. The dog's posture was alert but relaxed, not the tense vigilance of an animal sensing danger to its master, but the patient attention of one waiting for a familiar routine to play out. Switch, sensing Ryder's momentary hesitation, stepped forward to reassert the gang's dominance. You picked the wrong day to play hero, old man. He circled Chuck, moving with the exaggerated swagger of someone performing for an audience. What are you, anyway? Some washed-up rodeo clown? Retired mall cop? Chuck didn't turn to follow Switch's movement, didn't acknowledge the taunts. His attention remained fixed on Ryder the leader, the decision-maker, the one whose choices would determine what happened next. The sun beat down mercilessly, sweat beading on Ryder's forehead, while Chuck remained dry, seemingly immune to the heat. Another small detail that fed the growing seed of doubt in Ryder's mind. Mara edged her bike forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Chuck's still form. "Ryder," she called, voice tense. "We're burning daylight. Jacob's shipment won't wait." It was an excuse, transparent to anyone paying attention, an attempt to provide Ryder with a face-saving exit from a situation that was veering off script. But Ryder had invested too much now, performed too confidently for his crew. Backing down would cost him something he valued more than safety, his image. "Shut up, Mara," he snapped, not looking at her. To the others he called, "Circle tighter. No one's going anywhere until I say so." The remaining gang members revved their engines in acknowledgement, their bikes inching closer to form an impenetrable ring around Chuck and his truck. The circle of chrome and leather gleamed in the harsh sunlight, heat rippling off metal and asphalt in visible waves. Chuck observed it all with the same impassive calm, taking in each position, each angle. His eyes flickered briefly to the rearview mirror of his truck, connecting with Dusty's gaze for a split second before returning to Ryder. "Your call," he said quietly. "Walk away now, and we all go home." It was an offering one last chance to defuse the situation. The words were delivered without threat or bravado, a simple statement of fact. But to Ryder, they sounded like a challenge, and challenges to his authority in front of his crew were unforgivable. "Our home is this highway, old man," he replied, voice rising to ensure his gang could hear him clearly. "And you're trespassing." Switch searched the truck. Switch's grin widened as he moved toward the pickup's driver's side door. "Let's see what Grandpa's hauling." "I wouldn't," Chuck said, the words stopping Switch mid-stride. Again, no threat in the tone, just a calm advisement. Switch hesitated, glancing at Ryder for direction. Ryder's face darkened. "What did I just say?" "Search the damn truck!" With a nervous laugh, Switch resumed his approach, reaching for the door handle only to freeze at the sound that greeted him. A low, steady growl emanating from inside the cab. Dusty hadn't moved from the driver's seat, hadn't bared his teeth or made any aggressive motion. But the sound coming from the German shepherd's throat carried ancient warning, primal and unmistakable. Switch backed away quickly, hand dropping from the door. "Whoa, easy. He's got a junkyard dog in there." "Scared of a mutt, Switch?" Ryder scoffed. But he made no move to approach the truck himself. Chuck's gaze remained level, his voice matter of fact. "His name's Dusty. He doesn't bite unless I tell him to." A brief pause, then, "I haven't told him to. Yet." The subtle emphasis on the last word hung in the air. Ryder felt the dynamic shifting beneath his feet control, slipping away with each passing second. The old man's composure was unnerving. The dog's growl, unsettling. Worse, he could sense his crew watching, gauging his response, measuring his authority against this unexpected resistance. He took a step closer to Chuck, deliberately crowding him, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate. "You think I'm scared of you and your mutt? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Chuck looked up at him, unimpressed by the height difference. "Do you?" The quiet question landed like a stone in still water, ripples of uncertainty spreading outward. For the first time, Ryder felt a flicker of genuine doubt. Who was this old man? Why wasn't he afraid? From her position on the periphery, Mara studied Chuck more intently. The way he stood, balanced and grounded, the weathered hands hanging loose at his sides, relaxed, yet ready. The clear eyes that missed nothing. Recognition dawned slowly. pieces clicking into place from half-remembered news stories and documentaries. "Ryder," she called sharply. "I need to talk to you. Now." The urgency in her voice was unmistakable, but Ryder was too far committed to his course. Backing away now would make him look weak. Indecisive qualities that would undermine his leadership more surely than any external challenge. "Whatever it is, it can wait," he replied without looking at her. To Chuck, he said, "Last chance, old-timer. Hand over your wallet and phone, or things get physical. Your choice." Switch and another gang member moved to flank Ryder, creating a wall of intimidation. The message was clear. 3 against 1, with the others ready to join, if needed. Chuck looked at each of them in turn, his expression unchanged. Then, with deliberate slowness, he removed his hat, revealing thinning hair still showing traces of its original ginger color among the gray. He placed the hat carefully on the hood of his truck. The simple action, unhurried, precise, carried an unexpected weight. It wasn't the gesture of someone preparing to surrender. It was the gesture of someone preparing to work. "I'm giving you boys one last opportunity," Chuck said, rolling his shoulders slightly to loosen them. "Get on your bikes and ride away. No hard feelings." Ryder's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. "Or what? You'll bore us to death with more cowboy wisdom?" Chuck didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at the truck, making brief eye contact with Dusty through the windshield. No words were exchanged, but some communication passed between man and dog. The growling stopped. Dusty settled back in the seat, watching intently, but no longer vocalizing his warning. When Chuck turned back to Ryder, something had changed in his demeanor, subtle, nearly imperceptible, but present nonetheless. The passive waiting was gone, replaced by a quiet readiness that radiated from him like heat from the asphalt. "Or you learn a lesson your daddy should have taught you long ago," he finally answered, voice still measured. "About respecting your elders." Ryder's face flushed dark, with anger. "Respect is earned, old man." He took another step forward, fists clenching. "And you haven't earned shit." In the periphery, Mara dismounted from her bike, moving with sudden urgency. "Ryder, don't. I know who he is." But her warning came too late. Ryder lunged forward, throwing a lazy, arrogant jab aimed at Chuck's face, a bully's punch, meant to hurt and humiliate rather than seriously damage. It never connected. Chuck shifted slightly, a minimal movement, efficient and precise. Ryder's fist sailed past his ear, meeting nothing but hot Texas air. Before Ryder could register the miss, Chuck's hand shot up, palm flat against the younger man's chest, and pushed. It was not a strike, just a push, the kind of casual gesture one might use to create personal space in a crowded room. But the effect was dramatic. Ryder stumbled backward, as if hit by something much more substantial, arms pinwheeling as he fought to regain his balance. He managed to stay on his feet, but only barely, his face registering shock before it twisted into renewed fury. "What the hell?" he began, but Chuck cut him off. "That was your free one," he said calmly. "There won't be another." The warning hung in the air, clear and unmistakable. Switch's nervous laugh sliced through the tension. "Lucky dodge, old man." But the mockery sounded hollow now, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Ryder straightened, adjusting his leather cut with an angry jerk. "Enough games," he snarled. To his crew he shouted, "Take him down!" Switch responded instantly, lunging toward Chuck from the side, while the third gang member moved in from the other direction. A coordinated attack meant to overwhelm their target with numbers and speed. But Chuck was already moving. He sidestepped Switch's charge with the same economy of motion he'd used against Ryder, adding a subtle redirection with his hand that sent the lanky biker stumbling past him. Switch's momentum carried him forward until he collided with his own motorcycle. the impact sending bike and rider crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs and chrome. The third attacker fared no better. He managed to grab Chuck's arm, thinking he'd secured it advantageously, to find his wrist caught in a grip like iron. Chuck twisted slightly, applying precise pressure to nerve points. The biker's eyes widened in shock as pain shot up his arm, his fingers going numb, his knees buckling beneath him. Chuck released him as he fell, the entire exchange taking less than 3 seconds. The remaining gang members watched in stunned silence as 2 of their own were neutralized with seemingly effortless efficiency. The old man had barely appeared to move, yet Switch was groaning on the ground beside his fallen bike, and the third attacker was on his knees, cradling his wrist, face pale with pain and surprise. Mara's voice cut through the shocked silence. "I tried to tell you, Ryder. That's Chuck Norris." The name landed in the scorching air like a thunderclap. Recognition dawned on the faces around the circle, eyes widening, postures changing as the gang members reassessed the unassuming figure before them. Chuck Norris, martial arts champion, action star, the subject of 1,000 legends and jokes. Older now, certainly, but unmistakable in the flesh. Ryder's expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, realization, and then most dangerous of all, wounded pride. Being bested by an ordinary senior citizen would have been humiliating enough. Being bested by Chuck Norris in front of his entire crew was intolerable. "I don't care if he's Santa Claus," he spat, fury overriding good sense. "Nobody makes a fool out of me on my road." With a roar of rage, he charged forward, abandoning all pretense of technique in favor of raw aggression. Chuck stood his ground, centered and calm, amid the chaos, a still point in the eye of the storm. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly, casting harsh shadows across the tableau, shadows about to shift as swiftly and decisively as the balance of power on that lonely stretch of highway. Ryder's charge was all fury and no finesse, bull rushing a matador. Powered by wounded pride and blind rage, he bore down on Chuck with his full weight behind a wild haymaker, a knockout punch meant to end the confrontation in a single, decisive blow. It might have worked against an ordinary senior citizen. It might even have worked against a trained fighter who'd let his skills rust with age. It did not work against Chuck Norris. Chuck pivoted slightly, his movement so subtle, it was almost imperceptible. Ryder's punch sliced through empty air where Chuck's jaw had been a millisecond earlier. The miss threw the gang leader off balance, his momentum carrying him forward into vulnerability. Chuck's response was controlled, measured a short, sharp jab to Ryder's solar plexus, delivered with surgical precision. Not his full strength. Not meant to seriously injure, just enough force to introduce Ryder to consequences. The impact drove the air from Ryder's lungs in an audible whoosh. He doubled over, gasping, eyes wide with shock as much as pain. Chuck stepped back, hands returning to a neutral position, giving the younger man space to recover. "That's one," Chuck said quietly. Around them, the gang members shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. The dynamic had changed dramatically in the space of seconds. Their undefeated leader, the man who'd built his reputation on fearsome dominance, was bent over, struggling to breathe. Switch had managed to regain his feet, pushing his fallen bike upright with a metallic scrape against asphalt. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by wary calculation, as he looked from Ryder to Chuck and back again. Mara remained apart from the others, her expression a complex mix of concern and something almost like satisfaction. She'd tried to warn them, tried to prevent exactly this outcome. Now all she could do was watch as the inevitable played out. Ryder straightened slowly, one hand pressed against his midsection, face flushed with a dangerous combination of embarrassment and escalating rage. "Lucky shot," he managed between ragged breaths. Chuck didn't respond to the transparent attempt to save face. He simply waited, his stance relaxed but ready, pale eyes watchful. Dusty observed from the truck, head tilted slightly, ears perked forward with interest. The dog seemed more curious than concerned, as if watching a familiar training exercise, rather than a genuine threat to his master. Ryder turned to his crew, seeking reinforcement. "What are you waiting for? Get him!" The command hung in the air, met with hesitation. The gang members who remained on their bikes exchanged uncertain glances. The calculus had changed. This wasn't some helpless traveler or nervous trucker. This was Chuck Norris, older, yes, but demonstrably still dangerous. "Now!" Ryder barked, desperation edging into his voice. Two riders reluctantly dismounted, moving forward with visible apprehension. One drew a switchblade from his pocket, the metallic click of its opening unnaturally loud in the tense silence. The other picked up a heavy chain from his bike, wrapping it around his fist. Chuck assessed the new threats with the same calm detachment he'd shown throughout. His gaze flickered briefly to the weapons, then back to the men's faces. He made no move to retreat, no attempt to return to his truck for safety. "Weapons against an unarmed senior citizen," he remarked mildly. "Your mothers must be proud." The biker with the chain faltered slightly, a flicker of shame crossing his features before Ryder's voice lashed out again. "Stop stalling and take him down." The two gang members moved in simultaneously, coordinated pincer attack. The one with the knife lunged from the left while his partner swung the chain in a wide arc from the right, attempting to trap Chuck between them. For a man in his 60s, Chuck's speed was astonishing. He stepped inside the chain's arc, neutralizing its effectiveness, while simultaneously catching the knife wielder's wrist mid-thrust. A quick twist. A precise application of pressure to nerve points. And the switchblade clattered to the asphalt. In the same fluid motion, Chuck's elbow found the chain wielder's sternum with controlled force, sending him staggering backward. The entire exchange took less than 2 seconds. The knife wielder found himself on one knee, arm immobilized in Chuck's grip, face contorted in pain. His partner stumbled back, chain dangling uselessly from his fist, struggling to regain his breath. Chuck released the first man with a slight push that sent him sprawling, then stepped back, resuming his neutral stance. 4 attackers had engaged him now, and 4 had been dispatched without Chuck throwing a single full-powered strike. "That's 2 and 3, he said, voice unchanged, as if he were simply keeping score in a friendly game. Sweat beaded on Ryder's forehead, no longer just from the Texas heat. His carefully constructed image was crumbling before his eyes. Worse, he could see the shift in his crew's faces, the first seeds of doubt taking root, respect transferring from him to the unassuming figure in worn boots and faded jeans. "He's an old man," Ryder shouted, voice cracking slightly. "There's 1 of him and 8 of us." 7. Mara corrected coldly from the periphery. "I'm not part of this fiasco." Her defection was like a physical blow. Ryder's head snapped toward her, eyes narrowing with betrayal. "You're either with us or against us, Mara." She met his gaze steadily. "Then I guess I'm against stupidity." A ripple went through the remaining gang. Members' glances exchanged. Subtle shifts in posture. The unified front was fracturing. Certainty replaced by doubt. Switch, who had recovered enough to rejoin the confrontation, looked between Ryder and Chuck, conflict evident on his gaunt face. Self-preservation warred with loyalty, caution with commitment. "Ryder, man," he said, voice low. "Maybe we should." "Shut up!" Ryder cut him off, desperation turning to recklessness. "I'm not losing to some washed-up has-been." With that, he reached behind his back and pulled out a handgun, a compact 9mm that gleamed dully in the harsh sunlight. The appearance of the weapon changed the temperature of the confrontation instantly, escalating it from dangerous to potentially lethal. "Not so tough now, are you?" Ryder sneered, aiming the pistol at Chuck's chest. A collective intake of breath swept through the gang. Even those most loyal to Ryder hadn't expected this turn. Intimidation was one thing, armed assault was another entirely. Chuck's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes sharpened, focusing on Ryder with new intensity. When he spoke, his voice carried a different quality, but with an edge of steel beneath the calm. "Son, you don't want to do that." Ryder's hand trembled slightly. Whether from adrenaline or uncertainty was impossible to tell. "Don't tell me what I want, old man." Inside the truck, Dusty's demeanor shifted for the first time since the confrontation began. The dog rose to his feet, a low growl building in his throat as he sensed the escalation of threat to his master. Mara took a step forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Ryder, put it down. This is way over the line." "Stay back," Ryder snapped, gun unwavering. "All of you stay back. This is between me and him now." Chuck's eyes never left Ryder's face, calm and steady despite the weapon pointed at his heart. "There's still a way out of this where nobody gets hurt," he said. "But you need to make the right choice now." Something in Chuck's voice, the absolute certainty, the complete lack of fear penetrated Ryder's rage. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across his features. The gun wavered almost imperceptibly. In that moment of hesitation, Chuck moved. His hand shot out with blinding speed, catching Ryder's wrist and directing the gun skyward in one smooth motion. His other hand delivered a precise strike to Ryder's elbow, not enough to break, but enough to send shock waves of pain up the arm, causing Ryder's fingers to spasm open. The gun fell from nerveless fingers. Chuck caught it before it hit the ground, ejected the magazine with practiced ease, and cleared the chamber. The bullet popped out, landing in the dust at their feet, a small, lethal thing, rendered harmless. The entire disarm took less than a heartbeat. One moment Ryder had control, the next he was weaponless, his arm trapped in Chuck's iron grip. A collective gasp went up from the watching gang members. It hadn't even looked real, more like a magic trick than a physical confrontation. One moment the gun was there. The next it wasn't. "That's 4, Chuck said quietly, releasing Ryder's arm and stepping back. He tucked the emptied gun into his own waistband and pocketed the magazine. "And that's enough." Ryder staggered backward, clutching his arm, face pale beneath his tan. The last vestiges of his bravado crumbled, replaced by naked fear as reality finally penetrated his understanding. This wasn't just some old man. This was something else, entirely a force of nature contained in human form. "Who?" he began, then swallowed hard. "Who the hell are you?" Chuck regarded him steadily, no triumph or anger in his expressions, just the same calm assessment he'd shown from the beginning. "Just a man passing through," he replied. "Who'd rather be on his way." The simplicity of the answer seemed to deflate Ryder further. He looked around at his crew, at the men nursing injuries, at Switch's conflicted expression, at Mara's knowing gaze. His kingdom of fear was collapsing around him, his authority evaporating in the merciless Texas sun. For the first time since the confrontation began, genuine uncertainty showed on Ryder's face, the expression of someone who had no idea what to do next, who had run out of script and bravado. In the distance, a new sound gradually became audible, the distinctive wail of a police siren, growing steadily louder as it approached from the direction of Fort Hancock. Chuck's eyes flickered toward the sound, then back to Ryder. "Sounds like we've got company coming," he observed mildly. "Might want to consider your options carefully." The siren's approach added urgency to an already charged situation. The gang members who were still on their bikes began revving engines, looking to Ryder for direction. But Ryder seemed frozen, caught between pride and pragmatism, unable to commit to either retreat or continued confrontation. Chuck turned away from him dismissively, walking back to his truck with unhurried steps. He retrieved his hat from the hood, dusting it off before placing it back on his head. To all appearances, he was simply a man concluding a roadside stop, unconcerned with the chaos around him. Dusty's tail thumped against the seat as Chuck approached, the dog's alert posture relaxing now that his master was returning. "He's just walking away," Switch muttered, disbelief evident in his voice. Mara was already back on her bike, kickstand up. "Be grateful that's all he's doing," she replied, loud enough for the others to hear. "Ryder, we need to go. Now." Her voice seemed to break through Ryder's paralysis. He straightened, cradling his arm, face hardening as he attempted to reassert control. "Everyone mount up," he ordered, voice rough. "We're moving out." The gang scrambled to comply, those who had been knocked down during the confrontation helping each other to their feet, retrieving scattered equipment, righting fallen bikes. The cohesion that had characterized their earlier formation was gone, replaced by hurried, individual actions. As Chuck reached for his truck's door handle, Ryder called out one last time, "This isn't over, old man." Chuck paused, turning to regard him with those unnervingly calm eyes. He said nothing, just looked at Ryder for a long moment, his silence more eloquent than any threat could have been. Then he nodded once, a gesture that could have meant anything or nothing, and climbed into his truck. The siren grew louder, now accompanied by the flash of lights visible in the distance. The gang's departure took on new urgency, engines roaring to life, tires spinning on hot asphalt as they peeled away from the confrontation site. Ryder was the last to mount up, his face a mask of conflicted emotions: humiliation, fear, lingering anger. He cast one final glance at Chuck's truck before gunning his engine and speeding after his crew, dust billowing in his wake. Chuck watched them go in his rearview mirror, expression unchanged. Beside him, Dusty settled back into the passenger seat, panting contentedly as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Good boy," Chuck murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. He started the engine, its familiar rumble filling the cab. As the last of the bikers disappeared around a bend in the highway, Chuck put the truck in gear. The patrol car was visible now, approaching rapidly from the opposite direction, lights flashing against the backdrop of endless Texas sky. Chuck pulled forward slowly, positioning his truck at the side of the road to let the patrol car pass. But to his mild surprise, the vehicle slowed as it approached, eventually coming to a stop alongside his pickup. The window rolled down, revealing a middle-aged man in a khaki uniform, hat pulled low against the sun's glare. Deputy Hank Willis leaned out, pushing his sunglasses onto his forehead as he squinted at Chuck. "Everything all right here, Mr. Norris?" he called, gaze traveling from Chuck to the dust cloud still visible in the distance. "Thought I saw some commotion from up on Ridge Road." Chuck considered the deputy for a moment. Hank Willis had been patrolling these highways for nearly 15 years. They'd exchanged nods at the diner in town occasionally, passed the time of day at the gas station, but never moved beyond casual acquaintanceship. "Just a misunderstanding," Chuck replied finally. "Nothing worth writing up." Hank's eyebrows rose slightly. "That the chain gang I saw pulling out? They giving you trouble?" Chuck shrugged, the gesture deliberately non-committal. "They were," he allowed. "They aren't now." Understanding dawned slowly on the deputy's weathered face, followed by a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I see," he said, nodding. "Well, glad to hear it sorted itself out." He glanced again at the retreating dust cloud, then back at Chuck, curiosity evident. "Don't suppose you'd care to fill me in on the details? Been trying to catch those boys red-handed for months now." "Not much to tell," Chuck replied. "They stopped me. We had a conversation. They left." Hank chuckled, shaking his head slightly. "A conversation, huh? Must have been quite the talk." Chuck's expression remained impassive, but something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "Words can be persuasive, deputy." "I bet they can," Hank agreed, settling his sunglasses back into place. "Especially when they're backed up by other persuasions." He straightened in his seat, becoming more official. Need me to take a statement? Could help with the ongoing investigation. Chuck considered this, then shook his head. Don't think that'll be necessary. My guess is they'll be giving this stretch of road a wide berth for a while. Hank looked like he wanted to press the issue, but thought better of it. He nodded slowly. Your call, Mr. Norris. But if you change your mind, I know where to find you. Chuck finished for him. A moment of understanding passed between the two, meant the acknowledgement that some problems solve themselves without needing to involve paperwork or official channels. Hank touched the brim of his hat in a casual salute. You have yourself a good day then. Drive safe. Always do, Chuck replied. The deputy pulled away, making a U-turn to head back toward town, leaving Chuck once more alone on the empty highway. Dusty yawned widely, stretching in the passenger seat before settling back down, apparently ready to resume their journey as if it had never been interrupted. Chuck put the truck in gear, easing back onto the road. The bridge that had been their destination before the confrontation lay ahead, spanning the dry riverbed below. Beyond it, the highway stretched toward the horizon, shimmering in the heat. In the silence of the cab, Chuck allowed himself a small, barely perceptible smile, no of triumph or satisfaction, but of simple acknowledgement. Another day, another lesson delivered to those who needed it. Beside him, Dusty's tail thumped once against the seat, as if in agreement. The old pickup gathered speed, carrying them forward into the vast Texas afternoon, leaving the confrontation behind like just another mile marker on a long, familiar road. 10 miles down the highway, rider Shane Maddox pulled his bike to the shoulder, the rest of the gang following suit. Engines died one by one until only the desert silence remained. Ryder dismounted stiffly, nursing his injured arm, his face flushed with humiliation. This is bad, Switch muttered, leaning on his handlebars. If word gets out. It won't, Ryder snapped. Nobody talks about this. Nobody. Mara sat astride her bike, slightly apart from the others. It happened, Ryder. Denying it won't change that. He rounded on her, eyes blazing. You trying to say something, Mara? Because I'm still in charge here. Are you? The question hung in the air between them. Because from where I'm sitting, you just got handed your ass by a man old enough to be your grandfather. Tension crackled through the group. No one spoke to Ryder that way, not if they wanted to remain in the gang. We regroup, Ryder finally said, voice rough. And we make sure that old man regrets ever crossing our path. I don't know, man, Switch interjected. That wasn't just any old-timer. That was Chuck Norris. I don't care if it was God himself, Ryder snarled. Nobody makes a fool out of me and gets away with it. He didn't just make a fool of you, Mara pointed out matter-of-factly. He disarmed you. He could have killed you, Ryder. He chose not to. The truth hit Ryder like a physical blow. For a brief moment, his mind flashed to his childhood, his father's contemptuous voice, the lesson repeated with fists and belt. Weakness was unforgivable. He'd built his entire identity around never being weak. He got lucky, Ryder insisted. But the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. 8 against 1 isn't luck, Switch countered. That was something else. Silence fell, as reality settled over them like dust on their chrome. They'd built their reputation on being untouchable. Now that foundation was shattered. Maybe we should lie low for a while? A younger member suggested hesitantly. Head up to the canyon hideout until this blows over? Fine, Ryder conceded shortly. We'll head to the canyon. Regroup. As the gang prepared to remount, Mara remained still. Ryder, she said. Some fights aren't worth having. Some opponents aren't worth making. What's that supposed to mean? He demanded. It means sometimes the smartest move is to walk away. Like hell, Ryder spat. Nobody disrespects the chain gang and walks away. Mara held his gaze steadily. Well, I'm out. The statement landed like a thunderclap. What did you say? Ryder's voice dropped dangerously low. I said I'm out, Mara repeated, unflinching. This isn't what I signed up for. Pulling guns on old men? Planning revenge because your ego got bruised? That's not the road I want to ride. Switch stepped forward, alarmed. Mara, come on. Think about what you're saying. I have thought about it, she replied. For longer than you know. Ryder's expression darkened further. Nobody leaves the chain gang. Nobody. Mara Smileda. Small, knowing curve of her lips that contained neither fear nor regret. I just did. With deliberate movements, she unpinned the gang insignia from her leather cut, holding it out toward Ryder. When he didn't take it, she let it fall to the dust at his feet. You can't do this, he said, voice tight with barely controlled rage. I already have, she replied simply. She looked around at the others. Anyone else coming? A tense silence followed. Some looked away, unwilling to meet her gaze. Others shifted uncomfortably, caught between loyalty and doubt. Switch took half a step forward, hesitated, then stepped back. His conflict evident. Mara nodded once, accepting their choice without judgment. Be careful, she said. And think about what you saw today. Real strength doesn't need to shout. She kicked her bike to life and accelerated away, heading not toward the canyon hideout, but back toward town. Ryder watched her go, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles showed white. He snatched up the discarded insignia and hurled it into the desert with a wordless cry of rage. Mount up, he finally ordered, voice rough. We're moving out. One by one they obeyed, engines roaring to life. But as they pulled away, something had changed, spaces wider, alignments less precise. The unified front had fractured, hairline cracks spreading through what had once seemed impenetrable. Miles away, Chuck guided his pickup along the winding road to his ranch. The confrontation felt distant now, just another brief interruption in the steady rhythm of his days. Dusty's head rested contentedly on his thigh as Chuck absently stroked the graying fur. The familiar gates appeared ahead, the weathered sign reading, Flying Circle Ranch, swinging gently in the breeze. As he pulled up to the house, he noticed a motorcycle parked in the shade of the old cottonwood tree. Chuck assessed the situation calmly. He brought the truck to a stop and sat for a moment. Dusty lifted his head, ears perked forward, but showed no signs of alarm. Let's see what we've got, boy, Chuck murmured, stepping out. He moved unhurriedly toward the porch, Dusty padding alongside. As they rounded the corner, he saw Mara seated on the swing, her leather jacket removed, a small duffel bag at her feet. Mr. Norris, she greeted him. Hope you don't mind me waiting. Figured you'd be back eventually. Chuck regarded her steadily. Most people use the phone. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Most people aren't leaving a biker gang. Understanding dawned in Chuck's eyes. He nodded slightly, acknowledging what remained unspoken, that returning to town might not have been safe. Coffee? He offered simply. That would be nice, she replied. Inside the modest ranch house, Mara took a seat at the kitchen table, while Chuck prepared coffee. Dusty settled on a worn rug in the corner, watching them with mild interest. When Chuck placed a steaming mug before her and took the seat opposite, Mara wrapped her hands around the ceramic. Thank you, she said. And they both knew she meant for more than just the coffee. Chuck nodded once, acknowledging everything that didn't need saying, that his intervention had given her the opening she'd been looking for. What's your plan? He asked after she'd taken her first sip. Mara considered the question. Head east, maybe. I've got a cousin in Louisiana who runs a garage. Said there's always work if I want it. Ryder won't let it go easy, she added after a moment. Leaving the gang. It's not done. He'll try to find you, Chuck stated rather than asked. Probably, she agreed. But he'll be looking for the bike first. A smile touched her lips. Which is why I'm hoping to trade it for something less conspicuous. Chuck's eyebrows rose slightly. You're looking to make a deal. If you're willing, she confirmed. My bike's worth 3 times what that old truck of yours is. But I'd trade straight across. Chuck sipped his coffee, considering her offer. It wasn't the motorcycle itself that interested him, it was what lay beneath the proposal. A clean break. A fresh start. Why? He asked finally. Mara met his gaze directly. Because I saw something today. I've been needing to see for a long time. Strength that doesn't need to prove itself. Power that doesn't depend on fear. Chuck listened without interruption. When she finished, he rose from the table and left the kitchen, returning moments later with a set of keys that he placed on the table. Registration's in the glove box, he said simply. It's not much, but it'll get you to Louisiana. Mara stared at the keys, then up at Chuck, surprise evident. You're serious? Trade seems fair to me, he replied with a slight shrug. She reached for the keys hesitantly. I don't know what to say. Nothing needs saying, Chuck answered. Sometimes the right road isn't the one you started on. 3 weeks later, the Bell County diner buzzed with the typical morning crowd, truckers fueling up before long hauls, farmers grabbing coffee after pre-dawn chores, locals gossiping over plates of eggs and hash browns. The air was rich with the scent of bacon and fresh-baked biscuits, punctuated by the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation. Chuck Norris sat in his usual booth by the window, nursing a mug of black coffee as he scanned the local newspaper. Dusty dozed contentedly beneath the table, occasionally lifting his head when the waitress passed by with a fresh pot. The diner had been Chuck's Thursday morning ritual for years, now a small concession to sociability in an otherwise solitary existence. The staff knew him well enough to bring his coffee without asking, to leave him in peace with his paper, to understand that his quiet presence was its own form of participation. Warm that up for you, Chuck? Rosa, the longtime waitress, appeared beside his table, coffee pot in hand. He nodded, folding the paper and setting it aside. Thanks, Rosa. She refilled his mug, then hesitated, glancing toward the door. Heard anything from that girl? The one who left town in your old Ranger? Chuck shook his head slightly, not expecting to. Rosa clicked her tongue. Well, word is the chain gang's been keeping clear of the county since that day. Sheriff Willis says he hasn't had a single complaint about road harassment in 3 weeks now. That so? Chuck replied mildly, though nothing in his expression suggested surprise. Rosa confirmed, leaning in slightly. And that Ryder fellow? I heard he's been having some leadership troubles. Half his crew split off, headed up to Amarillo Way. Chuck sipped his coffee without comment, but Rosa was used to carrying conversations for both of them. Anyway, she continued, straightening up, thought you'd want to know. Your usual today? Please. He nodded. She moved away to put in his order, leaving Chuck to his thoughts and his coffee. The news about the chain gang didn't surprise him. Power built on fear was always precarious. One demonstration of its limitations was often enough to shatter the illusion completely. The bell above the diner door chimed as a new customer entered. Chuck didn't look up immediately, his attention returning to an article about local water conservation efforts. It was only when a shadow fell across his table that he raised his eyes. Deputy Hank Willis stood there, Stetson in hand, his expression caught between professional neutrality and personal concern. Morning, Chuck, he greeted. Mind if I join you for a minute? Chuck gestured to the empty seat across from him. Help yourself. Hank settled into the booth, placing his hat on the seat beside him. He nodded to Rosa, who acknowledged him with a raised coffee pot from across the room. Nice day shaping up, Hank observed, glancing out the window at the clear blue sky. Chuck recognized the comment for what it was, a preamble, not the purpose of the visit. He waited, allowing Hank the space to come to his point in his own time. Rosa appeared with a mug, filling it with coffee before retreating again, sensing the official nature of the conversation. Hank added cream and sugar, stirred methodically, then looked up at Chuck with a more direct gaze. "Got a call from the Louisiana State Police yesterday," he said, keeping his voice low. "They found a body outside Shreveport. Male, late 20s. Shot twice. Execution style." Chuck's expression remained unchanged, but his attention sharpened. "Anyone I know?" Hank took a sip of his coffee before answering. "Ryder Maddox. Though, according to his ID, he was going by Richard Madsen these days. The information settled between them, its implications clear. Ryder had followed Mara to Louisiana exactly as he'd threatened to do." "Any suspects?" Chuck asked after a moment. Hank shook his head. "Nothing solid. But they did find something interesting on the body." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small evidence bag containing a piece of Metaltha chain gang insignia, identical to the one Mara had dropped in the dust 3 weeks earlier. "Pinned to his chest," Hank continued, "like a calling card." Chuck studied the emblem without touching the bag, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "I spoke with Ms. Voss by phone this morning," Hank added, watching Chuck carefully. "She's working at her cousin's garage in Baton Rouge, has been for 2 weeks now. Multiple witnesses place her at a staff barbecue the night Maddox was killed." "Sounds like she's in the clear then," Chuck observed mildly. Hank nodded slowly. "Technically, yes. Though the Louisiana detectives find it coincidental that Maddox turned up dead in the same state she relocated to." "Life's full of coincidences," Chuck replied. "It surely is," Hank agreed, returning the evidence bag to his pocket. "Anyway, I thought you should know. Given your brief acquaintance with the parties involved." Chuck nodded once, acknowledging the courtesy. "Appreciate it." They fell into a companionable silence, sipping their coffee as the diner's usual rhythm continued around theme orders called "Plates Delivered." Conversations flowing like the coffee Rosa poured with practiced efficiency. After a few minutes, Hank spoke again, his tone more casual. "Saw your old truck yesterday, by the way. Parked outside Henderson's auto body." Chuck raised an eyebrow slightly. "That so?" "Mm-hmm," Hank confirmed. "Getting a fresh paint job, looks like. Owner told me he bought it from some woman passing through. Said she gave him a deal he couldn't refuse." A hint of amusement touched Chuck's eyes. "Smart business." "Indeed," Hank agreed. He drained the last of his coffee and stood, retrieving his hat. "Well, I should get back to it. Thanks for the coffee and conversation, Chuck." Chuck nodded. "Anytime, Deputy." Hank settled his hat on his head, hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "You know, Chuck, some might say justice and the law don't always line up perfectly." Chuck met his gaze steadily. "Some might," he agreed. "But I've always found," Hank continued thoughtfully, "that in the long run, they tend to reach similar destinations, just by different roads." With that philosophical observation hanging in the air, Hank tipped his hat slightly and departed, the bell chiming again as the door closed behind him. Chuck returned to his newspaper, but his thoughts were elsewhere, following the threads of consequence that stretched from a confrontation on a sun-baked highway to a body found in the Louisiana night. He hadn't expected Ryder to let go so easily. Hadn't expected him to accept defeat and move on. Men like that rarely did. Rosa appeared with his breakfast, 2 eggs over easy, bacon, wheat, toast, setting the plate before him with a flourish. "There you go, on. Need anything else?" Chuck shook his head. "This is fine, thank you." As she moved away, the bell above the door chimed once more. Chuck glanced up automatically, then paused, fork halfway to his mouth. A woman stood in the entrance, scanning the diner. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her clothes simple and functional: jeans, boots, a plain blue work shirt with Lou's Auto Repair embroidered on the pocket. She carried herself differently than when he'd last seen. Her shoulders straighter, chin higher, gaze more direct. Mara Voss had changed in 3 weeks, and not just in appearance. She spotted him by the window and made her way through the bustling diner, nodding politely to Rosa as she passed. When she reached his table, she didn't sit immediately, instead standing with one hand resting lightly on the back of the empty chair. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, echoing Hank's earlier words. Chuck gestured to the seat, just as he had for the deputy. "Help yourself." Mara settled into the chair, folding her hands on the table before her. Up close, the changes in her were even more apparent, a calmness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A steadiness to her presence that spoke of battles fought and decisions made. "You're a long way from Baton Rouge," Chuck observed mildly. A small smile touched her lips. "Word travels fast. Small communities," he replied with a slight shrug. "Not much stays secret for long." Rosa approached, coffee pot in hand. "Can I get you something, honey?" "Just coffee, thanks," Mara answered. When Rosa had filled her mug and departed, Mara wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, her expression growing more serious. "I suppose you've heard about Ryder," she said, her voice low enough that it wouldn't carry to neighboring tables. Chuck nodded once. "Deputy Willis mentioned it." "I didn't kill him," she stated, meeting his gaze directly. "Didn't think you did," Chuck replied simply. Mara studied him for a moment, then nodded, accepting his response at face value. "The police seem satisfied with my alibi, but—" she trailed off, searching for the right words. "But you have your suspicions," Chuck finished for her. "Switch contacted me a week ago," she explained. "Said the gang had fractured after what happened here. Half went with him, splitting off from Ryder's increasingly erratic leadership." She sipped her coffee, gathering her thoughts. "He also said Ryder was obsessed with finding me, with making an example of me." Chuck listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing. 2 days later, Ryder turns up dead," Mara continued, "with our insignia pinned to his chest." "Sounds like internal politics," Chuck observed. Mara nodded slowly. "That's what I thought too. Switch taking over, eliminating the competition." She hesitated, then added, "But there's something else. Switch told me he's changing the gang's focus, moving away from highway harassment, focusing on motorcycle shows, charity rides, legitimate activities." "Quite the transformation," Chuck remarked. "He said something stuck with him." Mara continued, watching Chuck's face carefully. "Something about real strength, not needing to shout." The phrase hung between them, Mara's own words from that day on the ranch, echoing Chuck's earlier lesson to Ryder on the highway. "Words have power," Chuck said after a moment. "When they're backed by truth." Mara nodded, a weight seeming to lift from her shoulders. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small manila envelope, placing it on the table between them. "The title to the Ranger," she explained. "Signed over to you. And this." She placed a set of keys beside the envelope. "For your truck. Henderson finished the restoration work yesterday." Chuck glanced at the items but made no move to take them. "Wasn't necessary." "It was to me," Mara replied firmly. "I don't leave debts unpaid." Chuck studied her for a long moment, seeing beyond the surface changes to the deeper transformation beneath a woman who had found her own strength, who had broken free of old patterns, who was charting a new course by her own compass. "Fair enough," he said finally, accepting both envelope and keys with a nod of acknowledgement. Mara visibly relaxed, as if a final piece of unfinished business had been concluded to her satisfaction. "I'm heading up to Colorado," she said, her tone lighter now. "My cousin's opening a second garage in Denver, asked me to manage it." "Sounds like a good opportunity," Chuck remarked. "It is," she agreed. A new start. She hesitated, then added, I just wanted to stop by on my way through. To say thank you. For everything. Chuck nodded once, accepting her gratitude without need for elaboration. You take care of yourself, Mara Voss. You too, Chuck Norris, she replied, a smile touching her lips as she spoke his full Namino. Longer a legend or myth, but simply a man who had shown her a different kind of strength. She rose from the table, leaving her coffee mostly untouched. With a final nod of farewell, she turned and made her way back through the diner, the bell chiming softly as she departed. Chuck watched her go, noting the confidence in her stride, the purpose in her movement. Another page turned, another chapter closed. He returned to his breakfast, cutting into his eggs with methodical precision. Beneath the table, Dusty shifted position, settling more comfortably against his master's boot. Outside, the Texas morning continued to unfold, sun climbing higher, shadows shortening, the world spinning on as it always had and always would. Chuck Norris was just one man in that vast turning. But today, as on so many days before, he had made his small mark upon it. Not with noise or spectacle, not with domination or fear, but with the quiet strength that came from knowing exactly who he was and standing firm in that knowledge. As he had shown Ryder and his gang on that dusty highway, as he had reminded Mara during their brief acquaintance, true power didn't need to announce itself with threats and bravado. Real strength was measured in self-control, in precision, in the refusal to be provoked. And respect? That couldn't be taken. It could only be earned quietly, consistently, one choice at a time. Chuck finished his meal, left payment on the table with his customary generous tip, and rose to leave. Dusty stretched and stood beside him, ready as always to follow wherever his master led. Together, they stepped out into the bright Texas morning, two old warriors, continuing their journey with the same quiet dignity that had carried them this far. The road stretched before them, endless with possibility, waiting to see what they would make of it. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.